Hi, I'm Professor Amy French, and I'm here today with Professor Lauren Smith. We're both at Delta College. I'm the coordinator for the Humanities Learning Center, who is um, so happy that this guest would come to us today and share with us. Uh, Lauren is going to share with us her students' project from English 111, which is College Comp 1. And I'm so excited. When she told me about this, I thought, oh my, please give us an interview because I know you, our viewers, are going to love this. It's called Michigan Pandemic Story, and it's a really cool project. So thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. And can you tell us a little about the project? What did the students do? So what was going on here?
Thank you so much, Professor French. And if nothing else, you and I get to see each other. And
Yes.
I'm so delighted to be a part of an HLC project. It's really exciting for me too. So where this all started, the Pandemic Storybook Project, was last winter, right when COVID-19 first became our reality. Like thousands of professors all over the country, I had to switch from face-to-face to virtual. My students all had to do that too. And I had a literary theory class, which tried to talk about literature in a cultural context. Okay. Meanwhile, the world outside was changing and scary things were happening. And so I poked around on the CDC website and found a series of firsthand accounts from survivors of the 1918-1919 flu pandemic, what's referred to sometimes as the Spanish flu. And so I assigned those stories to my students to read at the time, really as a coping mechanism in a way. I just wanted them to see that what they were going through really had in some ways happened before. And so that turned out to be a productive experience. But then my fall semester was rolling around, and it struck me as an opportunity to maybe do more with what I had learned about the parallels between these pandemics, and to give my students an opportunity to take advantage of our current moment, which has certainly never happened before. And hopefully won't happen again. And so the impetus for the project became for us to make a hyper-local version of the CDC pandemic storybook for COVID-19. And my goal as an instructor was to try to always, first of all, help my students become better writers and thinkers, but also then to offer a service to our community in a way that we could. And that meant for us collecting some oral histories that related to COVID in this moment. So that was how it started.
What a fabulous project. Could you screen share with us and show us?
I can. And I teach mainly first year college students, students who are in a required environment, but almost all college students will have to take English 111. It's sort of a pivotal experience. And so I also felt the pressure, and I'm sure a lot of us did in a number of ways, to make their time count, and try to do something that really would be impactful. So here is my pandemic story. Okay, so this is the public blog that my students worked very hard to create.
And I'll have this link below for everyone.
Oh, great. So then there's just a little explanatory note, and then what you can do, what any visitor can do, is you can click on a county or location and read stories from those locations. And we'll look at more of those in a little bit if we have time. Or you can just actually witness people's names. And you could click on Deanne from Essexville and see how things have been going. You can read about Ethan or Ramey or Tina. And my students took this assignment very seriously, and everyone who was interviewed for the project had to sign and submit an agreement form. And participants were told that this will be live online for at least a year. I hope it'll be online after that, but that was the initial terms that they were given. They had the right to change their name if they wished, and we could only just do first names just to sort of guarantee a comfort. And I also gave my students the option to start an interview for a story and then just decide that it wasn't a fit, or the participant could stop at any moment. And so the students were asked to do 4 interviews, and 3 were acceptable for the assignment, just to give us some flexibility. And the stipulation was the people they interviewed had to be at least 18, and had to be in Michigan for the early part of the pandemic, which was March through June.
Right.
And in order to warm them up to this project took 6 weeks, and it was the last thing we did together as a class. What we spent the previous 6 weeks doing was studying the Spanish flu more in depth. And is this a good time to show
us some stuff?
Say it again?
Exciting. This is exciting. Show us some stuff. Show us what they studied.
I mean, I could talk all day on it. I'm just glad other people are.
Little snippet.
Just a little bit.
A little bit.
This is where it all started. Okay, so these are the CDC stories.
Okay.
So, for example, Betty Sompe from Pennsylvania was one of the first recipients of a vaccine. And often in the storybook, it's relatives who are doing the storytelling, and then my students are able to use that same declaring process, so they get some work on citation and attribution as well. But so many of my students, and I'm devastated to say this to my historian colleague, never heard of the Spanish flu. No conception it happened. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We know.
I know. 10 million people died. Never heard about it. It's astonishing. And so they really had some awakenings just related to that, and the size and the scale of the problem. The National Archives has a decent collection of materials that I was happy to show students, and it's interesting to show students an image like this. Okay, a secretary sitting at her desk with a mask on, probably the way a lot of them have had to do in current times. If nothing else, and this is a bit of an aside, masks certainly have emerged as a big theme in all of this, because whether you had it, didn't have it, know people who, or don't know anybody who has it, you've had to deal with the topic of masks. And that's interesting to think about too. And so here, for example, is a trolley person in Seattle telling the anti-masker that he can't get on the train. And so this was interesting to share with students.
Yeah.
We also looked at some music. There's a blues standard called the 1919 Influenza Blues.
I'll link that below too, so you guys
can hear that. Contains potent lines such as, "He killed the rich and the poor, and he's going to kill some more if you don't turn away from your shame." I mean, we have to have some room for little gallows humor, maybe, but we did a discussion board that week on figuring out causation and the different ways people tried to understand what happened. Again, me as the instructor, I always have in my mind, well, okay, what meaning are they going to make of the current moment now that they, have had this other context? And then the University of Michigan, the medical school, is a wonderful resource called the Influenza Encyclopedia, which consists mainly of newspaper clippings from the flu era. And so here we have something from a Grand Rapids paper, "Flu epidemic not conquered." Okay, and you probably can't see it from where you are, but Bay City and Saginaw are referenced specifically as not at all being over the pandemic, and please, people need to slow down with their re-engagement with society. And then we have, again, a headline might as well be from today: "Governor promises to lift ban on meetings by next Friday or Saturday." Okay, that's not Governor Whitmer, that's Governor Sleeper, okay, who about 100 years ago was making the same kinds of decisions that we see our leadership struggling with today. And in this particular document, this is a Detroit-based publication, the pandemic had kind of made its way through Detroit. Numbers were down, curves were flattened if they thought about it that way, but the rest of the state was still very much suffering, and people were stressing to the governor that the whole state wasn't ready to open, and he agreed to do that. But again, he has to ask for patience. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
something that we all are certainly familiar with. So I tried to give my students this very general and in some ways surface understanding of the flu pandemic from that time. They also read Pale Horse, Pale Rider by Catherine Ann Porter, which is one of the few novels that exists on the subject. Porter herself was a flu survivor. She was a 24-year-old reporter in Denver, Colorado. And she was so sick that her newspaper, was setting the type for her obituary while she was in the hospital, but then she recovered and got out. It's amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So the students got to engage with all of that material, and then they segued into doing their own version of this work, which ended up being the Storybook Project. So that's how we got here.
Cool. Would you like to share some of your students' findings? Can you share some with us?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of information, and I'm certainly not a web designer, and I didn't have that in my pedagogy. And I do hope to make the page a little bit more visually engaging, perhaps. But I do encourage anybody who's watching this talk to poke around and look at any of these. And there are a lot of stories that are what a college student would experience, or just out of high school experience. Yeah, I lost my prom. I lost my spring break trip. I couldn't play sports. All of that is recognized here. But then we also have stories from working adults who are not in college or education. For example, somebody like Mandy from Essexville, okay, who's interviewed by this student. Okay, Mandy is about 49, and at the time that COVID became a reality for her, she was also undergoing breast cancer. And her story describes how she feels that the backup in the local hospitals prevented her from maybe getting the best or most necessary care she could at the time. Then there's someone like Bob from Linwood, who ended up leaving his job in food services because he felt that people were not following the protocols well enough, and he didn't want to endanger his family. And later on made some part-time money on DoorDash and the like. And he had COVID himself, and he has recovered. Okay, and he notes that he still has a positive outlook on life, and he feels really glad that he recovered. But he does come to this conclusion: the pandemic shown the true nature of many people that he considered close friends previously. And so my students had an opportunity to do this witnessing and reporting. So Alex would get to have that experience. Bob got the experience of telling it, and now we get to have it by reading it. Then I have some accounts from healthcare workers working with the elderly, and how painful that situation was. Describing things like now constantly looking over one's shoulder and maintaining a 6-foot bubble. Now this one is for the educators in the area here. My heavens, what is it like to try to do Zoom and distance learning if your pupils also happen to be hard of hearing, or who also have other documented alternative routes to learning? And so this particular interview describes what it was like to maintain the functioning of that kind of secondary school environment under really challenging circumstances. And her own conclusion is she believes that everyone deserves the same education no matter what disadvantages they have. She tries to put practices into use that she believes will get the results needed. And she's quite proud, and she should be, of having 90% parent participation in Zoom conferences.
Wow.
Quite a feat. So what else can I tell you about?
Well, I would love to know what surprised you about the project. You know, did any of the students maybe share their takeaways, or was there something else that surprised you?
It's a really good question. I was initially quite surprised that the majority of the students, and I had about 50, because I did it over a number of classes, had no problem getting people to agree to interview and then had no problem doing the interviews. I thought that was going to be a real struggle. I thought that they just weren't either going to be able to find subjects or not be able to do the work in general. And it just really wasn't the case. And because this was an online class, I set up a separate discussion forum where you could leave your contact information if you would be willing to be interviewed for it. And a couple of people took that option, but it really wasn't the majority at all. And so that was really interesting for me to notice. I also had, for unfortunately what was maybe the first time, students coming to me, first semester college students, in a required class. Most of the time a group who don't know what kinds of questions to ask because the world is also new to them, really expressing their own frustrations with media and misinformation, and wanting to make sure that they knew what sources they could trust, what sources they couldn't. I don't normally see students taking such an active role in trying to develop information literacy, and that was very powerful. And then I did have students who, in their reflective essays at the end of the project, share some pretty revelatory things. I had one student write about how when she had been given the assignment, she just felt too shy to talk to her friends. She just didn't want to, she didn't know how to bring it up. And so she ended up asking like all parents or like just other grown people she had in her life. But then she read all the stories online and saw so much of her own experience mirrored back to her. And realizing that she could have talked to her friends probably. And so that was very, very compelling for me to see. And then I had a young man who wrote about how he had just not been convinced of the validity of the existence of the virus. He really harbored a lot of belief that it really all had been a hoax. But because of this assignment, he asked one of his friends to give him an interview. And his own friend shared with him that he lost a grandparent. And so then the student writes about his own feelings of some guilt and some shame about having been so skeptical and not believing when he saw his own friend being impacted so much. And I think most of us know regularly and are very in touch with the idea that empathy is very important in education, but this threw that even into sharper relief than I had ever imagined. And there was something about, I think, the person-to-person interaction. So maybe they don't think they can trust CNN, maybe they don't even think they can trust the CDC or the WHO, but they can talk to Marnie in Saginaw, they can talk to Dan in Essexville and hear their testimony, and that's going to stay with me for a long time.
I can't thank you enough for this. As a historian, one of the things that we do is that we teach information literacy. We have our students look at one of my favorite things is I give them the Chicago Times and the Chicago Tribune on the same day in history.
Oh, I love
about the same event and say, okay, what happened? play history, right? And it as you were talking, as you they often can't do it, and it shows us how we have to cull many resources. We have to one piece of information is not enough to make a thesis, and it's very good because it helps us today and students today to work through when they are trying to suss out, okay, well, what are the facts here? What's the truth? What and it's not that somebody's necessarily lying. It's that they might be looking at this part of something and somebody else is looking at this part. What you've done here, what your students have done here, you've made them authors first off, which I think is just phenomenal. Because most students write in a college Comp 1 class. And this is why if you're watching this and you're thinking, I might need to, brush up on my writing skills, Delta, we have open seats and classes. Come take, if not Professor Smith, we have tons of great professors. We have wonderful, great English professors come take a class. But you've made them authors. You've made them so that instead of just writing personally for their English professor, they're writing for anybody to read. And you have, I don't know if they realize this, but they made what they studied themselves to get those stories. I hope these stories are somehow archived. I hope these stories are there so that 100 years from now, students in a future class can look back and say, wow, here's some stories from the 2020. Let's just hope it's that, right? Let's just hope we're calling it the 2020 pandemic.
A little simpler, right, than trying to come up with
right.
cute names.
Let's hope that they're that they're telling the stories from the 2020 pandemic and looking back. And this can be a resource for historians and students of history down the road. And so kudos to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving up your time today. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share before we go, or you feel?
Just thank you for having this talk and for your words just now. It's very humbling for me to hear, you know, especially since I am doing something that maybe a little out of the box for a class. And, you know, my students have certainly studied commas and everything else they need to study, but that a holy grail in writing instruction is what they call authentic assignments. Okay, like writing that does something out in the world where it's not just about the grade they're going to get or the classroom tasks they have. And so this was about as authentic as I could do. And so that
well, I think you got the holy grail. And I also thank you for showing our viewers what goes on in an online classroom, because a lot of professors, there are professors like myself that were well-experienced online professors and had been doing this for literally a decade before we transitioned. But there were many more professors across the, across the globe, really, and teachers who had to transition to an online instruction environment that had no experience with it. And then we're trying to develop assignments that were meaningful and impactful. And I mean, you really nailed it. So way to go. But this nails it. I'm excited for our viewers to be able to look at it. I'm excited. I'll have everything linked below as much as I can. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And just, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for this wonderful project. And for those of you who are watching, I'm with Professor Lauren Smith. If you, walked out of the room at the beginning and didn't have it, she teaches at Delta College in our English department. I'm Professor Amy French. I teach in our history department at Delta College. And I'm also, this is brought to you by the Humanities Learning Center, who I'm the current coordinator. So thank you very much, Lauren. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. Take care.
Can I mention one more thing?
Sure, can.
Since I have this platform. My students really did have to figure out how to deal with writing the word COVID because there's so much inconsistency. The MLA has issued a statement. If you're going to say COVID-19, you have to capitalize it. You have to capitalize all those letters because it stands.
Oh, good. I've been doing it right.
No, right.
Oh, good. I just did it because it seemed like a proper noun to me, so I figured I should capitalize it. But okay. That's good to know.
It's a vernacular. You can just use the little letters, but
good for our viewers to know too.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye, everyone.